Imagine walking into your local Walmart, only to find the shelves eerily empty, the usual buzz replaced by a strange silence. Now picture the prices for everyday items, milk, bread, even basic household goods, suddenly soaring, making it harder for families to afford what they need. This isn't a scene from a dystopian movie, it was a real threat as a trade war loomed over the global economy, casting uncertainty over businesses and consumers alike. Decisions made in Washington sent shockwaves from the boardrooms of Arkansas to the factories of China, impacting households in every corner of America. Tariffs aren't just economic jargon, they're policies that hit your wallet, threaten your job, and shake the nation's stability, affecting both big corporations and small businesses. When the US enters a trade conflict, the world pays close attention as global markets react and uncertainty spreads. The Trump tariffs on China put Walmart and millions of everyday consumers at the very center of a global economic experiment, testing the resilience of supply chains and consumer patience. Political choices triggered economic aftershocks, sparking a national debate. Can we really protect American jobs without hurting American families and raising costs for everyone? The answers were never simple, tangled in economic theory, political maneuvering, and the real-life struggles of workers, families, and business owners. This story is a powerful lesson in how a single policy decision can disrupt supply chains, strain international relationships, and create uncertainty for everyone, from factory workers to families at the checkout line. The echoes of this trade war still shape our economy today, reminding us just how fragile and interconnected global prosperity truly is, and how quickly it can all be put at risk. US-China trade transformed the world, flooding America with cheap goods and fueling China's rise. Walmart thrived on this, building supply chains from Chinese factories to American homes. But critics warned of trade deficits, lost jobs, and unfair practices like intellectual property theft. These concerns simmered for years, but Trump made them central to his campaign, vowing to put America first. Once in office, he wielded tariffs as his weapon, aiming to force China to negotiate. The first tariffs hit steel and aluminum but soon expanded to electronics, clothing, and toys. China retaliated, targeting US agriculture and escalating the conflict. Businesses and consumers were caught in the crossfire as uncertainty gripped global markets. The era of stable US-China trade ended abruptly, replaced by economic hostility. The world's two largest economies were now locked in a high-stakes standoff. By 2019, tariffs covered hundreds of billions in Chinese imports, hitting Walmart's core products. For the first time, consumer goods like shoes, clothes, and electronics faced steep new taxes. Walmart's CFO warned, higher tariffs mean higher prices, especially as the holiday season approached. Retailers faced a tough choice: absorb costs and lose profits, or raise prices and risk losing customers. The business community sounded the alarm, calling tariffs a tax on American families. Despite pleas, the administration insisted China was paying, holding firm on its policy. The result, a tense standoff between government and business, with shoppers stuck in the middle. Uncertainty made planning nearly impossible for retailers big and small. The trade war was no longer abstract, it was hitting wallets and store shelves nationwide. The stakes for American consumers had never been higher. Walmart, America's retail giant, found itself at the very center of the escalating trade war storm, a conflict that threatened to reshape the global economy. As the world's largest retailer, Walmart's influence stretched far beyond its own stores, touching the lives of millions of Americans every day. The company's famously low prices were built on a foundation of efficient global supply chains, many of them deeply rooted in China. But now, with new tariffs looming, that foundation was suddenly at risk. The cost of importing goods was rising, and the very system that kept prices down was under threat. Walmart didn't stay silent. The company warned the government that higher tariffs would leave them with two tough choices: either raise prices for customers or switch to more expensive suppliers. Both options would hit American families hard, especially those who depended on Walmart's affordability for their everyday needs. Inside Walmart's boardrooms, executives faced a difficult balancing act. Should they protect their profit margins or absorb the cost to keep prices low for loyal shoppers? Every decision carried risks, both financial and reputational. Publicly, Walmart reassured customers and policymakers that it would fight to keep prices down. But behind closed doors, the company admitted the pressure was mounting, and that absorbing all the extra costs simply wasn't sustainable in the long run. President Trump, meanwhile, challenged Walmart and other retailers to absorb the costs themselves, framing any price increases as a sign of corporate greed rather than economic necessity. The political spotlight intensified the pressure on Walmart's leadership. Walmart's leaders had to walk a fine line, explaining the harsh economic realities to the public and government without igniting a political firestorm or alienating their customer base. Behind the scenes, teams of buyers and supply chain experts worked around the clock, scrambling to find new suppliers, renegotiate contracts, and shift sourcing to other countries. But the sheer scale of Walmart's operations made these changes daunting and complex. Walmart's dilemma was not unique. Across the retail sector, companies struggled to adapt to a trade war that threatened to unravel decades of globalization and upend the way business had always been done. The choices Walmart made would send ripples through the entire economy, shaping the shopping experience and financial well-being of millions of Americans who walk through its doors every week. In the end, Walmart's predicament became a powerful snapshot of a nation caught between the promises of policy and the realities of everyday life, where every decision had consequences far beyond the walls of any single store. The impact of tariffs wasn't just a matter for big corporations. It struck at the heart of small businesses across America, turning daily operations into a struggle for survival. For many owners, the effects were immediate and deeply personal, changing the way they worked, hired, and even dreamed about the future. Take Hunter Company, a family-run toy supplier based in New Jersey, as a prime example of this struggle. When faced with a staggering 145% tariff, the CEO was forced to make heartbreaking decisions, laying off loyal workers, cutting back on production, and watching years of hard work unravel almost overnight. Moving manufacturing back to the US sounded like a solution, but in reality, the infrastructure and skilled labor simply weren't available. The cost and complexity made it nearly impossible for small businesses to compete. Desperate to survive, Hunter considered relocating operations to Vietnam, but this was a risky and expensive move with no guarantee of success, and it meant uprooting established supply chains and relationships. The toy industry as a whole was especially exposed, with a staggering 80% of all toys sold in the US being manufactured in China. This left companies with few alternatives and little bargaining power. Industry leaders sounded the alarm, warning that families would soon face higher prices at the checkout and fewer choices on store shelves, making everyday joys like buying a toy more difficult for many. The trade war threatened to wipe out entire sectors that had been built on decades of global partnerships, putting the future of countless businesses in jeopardy. Across the country, thousands of small suppliers and importers faced existential threats. Jobs were on the line, and entire communities felt the pressure as local economies faltered. The economic shock didn't stop at the factory gates. It rippled down the entire supply chain, costing jobs, creating anxiety, and leaving families uncertain about their futures. These stories revealed the hidden casualties of the trade war, real people, real families, and entire communities fighting to survive in a world suddenly turned upside down. While headlines focused on numbers and policy, they often missed the true human cost behind the economic conflict, the everyday struggles and sacrifices made by those on the front lines. Tariffs didn't just hit toys. They touched nearly every aisle at Walmart. Everyday essentials, from backpacks to car seats, faced price hikes. For families on tight budgets, even small increases hurt. Groceries weren't immune. Retaliatory tariffs from countries like Mexico raised costs on items like bananas. Trade disputes created a web of rising prices, showing how interconnected global commerce is. Economic uncertainty made consumers anxious, slowing spending and threatening growth. Surveys showed declining optimism as shoppers braced for higher costs. The tariffs acted like a broad tax, raising the cost of living for millions. The domino effect reached every corner of retail, from furniture to food. The trade war was now a daily reality for American families. Economists agreed. Tariffs are taxes paid by US businesses and consumers, not China. Studies showed Americans were paying billions more each month due to tariffs. Companies scrambled to find new suppliers, but alternatives were often pricier and less efficient. The forced supply chain shift created uncertainty and slowed economic growth. Retaliatory tariffs hit US farmers hard, slashing exports and forcing government bailouts. The trade war became a lose-lose, hurting both economies. While addressing unfair trade was important, broad tariffs proved blunt and costly. Experts argued for targeted negotiations, not unilateral taxes that isolated the U.S. The fallout was clear: tariffs strained businesses, farmers, and families alike. The trade war's turmoil spilled into a public clash between the White House and the Federal Reserve. As risks grew, the Fed cut interest rates to cushion the economy. President Trump attacked the Fed, blaming it for any slowdown and demanding deeper cuts. He even called the Fed a bigger enemy than China, fueling market uncertainty. The Fed saw tariffs as the main drag on growth, while the White House blamed monetary policy. This rift exposed deep divisions in U.S. economic strategy. The Fed was left managing an economy destabilized by government policy. The public feud added volatility, leaving businesses and investors on edge. The trade war's impact was now felt in both global markets and domestic policy battles. Empty Walmart shelves never materialized, but the scars of the trade war remained. A temporary deal paused escalation, but many tariffs stayed and core issues went unresolved. The conflict forced companies to rethink global supply chains, seeking resilience over cost. Businesses adopted a China Plus One strategy, diversifying production but facing higher expenses. For consumers, the lesson was clear: trade policy directly affects the cost of living. Tariffs proved to be a complex, often counterproductive tool with far-reaching consequences. The debate over trade and globalization is far from settled. The trade war showed how quickly tensions can disrupt lives and economies. In a connected world, there are no easy wins. Prosperity depends on strong, fair partnerships. The story of tariffs is a reminder: we all have a stake in a global system that works for everyone.